What if I told you that the most dangerous job in medieval times didn't involve swords, sorcery, or siege warfare, but the delicate art of childbirth? In a world where a sneeze could summon death, midwives wielded more power than kings. But for every life they brought into this world, darkness lurked, ready to strike with a vengeance. Why did women willingly step into a blood-soaked arena, armed only with bone-handled tools, their hands slick with sweat and fear? Because in a society that feared the female body as much as it revered it, midwives held the keys to life and death. Every birth was a gamble, each writhing cry a siren song that echoed the unknown. Imagine this, a hushed room filled with the scent of herbs, the flicker of candlelight casting shadows that danced in anticipation. The air thick with tension. Would the baby breathe? Would the mother survive? You're not just delivering a baby, you're playing a high-stakes game of chance against fate itself. And God help you if the outcome displeased the villagers. Accusations of witchcraft hung over midwives like a guillotine. A healthy birth? Exaltation. A disastrous one? You'd be branded a sorceress, a finger pointed, a noose ready. The stakes were as high as the fevered dreams of a plague-ridden town. Even the best midwives trembled at the thought of a single misstep. While you're at it, try explaining that to the desperate mother whose life slipped through your fingers. Picture it, your hand stained crimson, not from the act of creation but from the shadow of a curse. Who could you trust? The priests? They'd have you burned at the stake faster than you could say purgatory. The very community you served could turn on you, fueled by ignorance and fear. One whisper, one false rumor, and you were on the chopping block. Does that sound familiar? Like a bad reality show where the stakes are life and death? And the humor? Oh, dark as the edge of a rusty blade. Ever tried to comfort a screaming woman with the promise that childbirth was unnatural? A twisted joke, like telling a drowning man to just swim harder. Meanwhile, your own heart races, caught in the jaws of anxiety and absurdity. But why endure this chaotic circus? Because midwives were the unsung heroines, the ones who knew the wild, unspoken truths about the human body. They wielded knowledge like a weapon, defying the misogynistic tide that threatened to drown them. Each baby born was a small revolution against the expectations of their time. So, what twisted fate awaited those who dared to stand in the flickering shadows of childbirth? Were they saviors or scapegoats? In a world rife with superstition and terrifying taboos, the answer is anything but simple. Buckle up. This is a story steeped in blood, betrayal, and the raw, unfiltered reality of life on the brink. Welcome to the untold saga of midwives. You'll wish you hadn't asked. The air crackled with tension, heavy as a storm cloud pregnant with rain, when I first laid eyes on her. The midwife, a spectre in a darkened room, was all at once an anchor and a harbinger. She moved with a fluid grace, her hands calloused and wise, hovering over a woman writhing in agony. Screams clawed at the walls, slicing through the night silence, a sound so raw, it felt like a beast being born. I could almost taste the fear, sweet and cloying, mixing with the damp, musty scent of the straw that littered the floor. "Hold on, Elspeth. You're stronger than you know." The midwife's voice, a calming balm, cut through the chaos. Yet, in her eyes flickered a shadow, a flicker of doubt that screamed louder than the cries echoing in the cramped room. A child was coming, sure, but not without a cost. The clock on the wall ticked ominously, each second a serrated edge, counting down the moments to salvation or despair. I remember the first time I saw her. It was at dusk, the sun swallowing itself in a fiery embrace. She stood in the center of town, her apron stained with the remnants of life and loss, a walking testament to the fragility of existence. Her name was Agnes, and she wore her scars like jewels, each line on her face a narrative of survival. She was the keeper of secrets, the bearer of burdens, cradling the weight of her community's hopes and fears in her hands. "Elspeth," Agnes urged, her breath steady despite the storm of chaos swirling around them. "You must push. Do not let the shadows consume you." A flicker of confidence ignited in Elspeth's eyes, but just as quickly, it was snuffed out by the agony of labor. I could feel the room shudder with her pain, an earthquake of emotion that rattled the very bones of our existence. But time, relentless and cruel, would not pause. It marched on in its unyielding rhythm, and with each gasp of breath, with each cry that slipped from Elspeth's lips, the shadows loomed larger. I watched as Agnes, with the heart of a lion yet the tenderness of a dove, brushed hair from the new mother's forehead, soothing a spirit that felt on the brink of fracture. In that moment, she was both warrior and healer, her hands a bridge between life and death. Then there was Marjorie, her face pale as a spectre, standing in the corner with eyes wide and shimmering like glass. She had lost 3 children to the cruel hands of fate, and tonight, the spectre of loss danced before her once more. I could see her heart pounding behind her ribs, a prisoner of her own memories, terrifyingly vivid, hauntingly familiar. "Please, Agnes, I can't bear to watch this again." Her voice trembled like a candle flickering in the wind, a fragile flame. What if it's not meant to be?" Agnes turned her gaze to Marjorie, her expression a tapestry of empathy and resolve. "You must trust, Marjorie. Life is a fickle mistress, but hope is a stubborn flame. It flickers even in the darkest hours. Hope. Such a fragile word, dancing on the edge of despair. Outside, the moon hung low in the sky, a ghostly witness to the drama unfolding within. Shadows twisted and turned, weaving stories of pain and joy, of the unexplainable bond between life and death. As the minutes bled into hours, the struggle continued, a battle fought in whispers and shouts. Elspeth's cries grew more desperate, a primal call that clawed at the fabric of the night. The walls, thick with the weight of history, seemed to lean in closer, eager to absorb the agony. "Just one more push," Agnes urged, desperation creeping into her voice as a crack of thunder rumbled outside, mirroring their internal storm. "You can do it, Elspeth. For your child." And then it happened, an instant of breathless silence, the world holding its collective breath. Time hung suspended, a delicate thread in the tapestry of fate, before the air shattered with a piercing cry. It wasn't just a scream, it was a declaration of life, a shout against the void. Tears streamed down Elspeth's face, a mix of salt and relief, as Agnes cradled the child in her arms. The tiny form, slick and squirming, was a miracle forged in fire. In that moment, I felt the weight of every mother's heart, every ache, every dream, every flicker of hope that hung in the balance, swaying like a candle in the wind. But darkness lurked ever so close, an insistent whisper that reminded us of the fragility of existence. Marjorie, still haunted by her spectres, stepped forward, eyes locked onto the new life cradled in Agnes's arms. "Is it truly safe?" she murmured, her voice barely more than a breeze. "Will this one slip through our fingers like the others?" Agnes turned to her, fierce determination igniting her gaze. "We do not know what tomorrow brings, Marjorie. But we fight for this moment. We fight for every heartbeat." A cacophony of emotion swirled, inseparable from the air we breathed, joy and fear, hope and despair, laughter and tears. It was all intertwined, a melody played on the strings of the heart. In that moment of raw humanity, I understood the weight Agnes carried every day. A midwife was not merely a deliverer of babies, she was a guardian of stories, a keeper of dreams, a warrior of life, navigating the treacherous waters of existence. In her hands, she held the power to cradle joy and heartbreak, to weave together the threads of life that could unravel at any moment. And as Elspeth's quiet sobs of joy echoed through the room, I felt the atmosphere shift. Shadows that had loomed so large began to recede, replaced by a fragile light that glimmered with possibility. Yet, as quickly as it appeared, I knew it could vanish. Life in this medieval world was a dance, a beautiful, terrifying waltz with death lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for its turn once more. But for now, they stood together, Elspeth, Agnes, Marjorie, bound by the intensity of the moment, their spirits intertwined like the roots of ancient trees buried deep beneath the soil. Just a heartbeat, a breath, a flicker of flame in a world that often felt shrouded in darkness. And I realized then that the role of the midwife in this society was etched in blood and sweat, a story that would never truly end. It would echo through the years, a relentless cycle of life and loss, forever haunting the corners of our hearts. The clang of metal on metal reverberated through the musty air, drowning out the murmur of despair that clung to the walls like a second skin. A flickering candle cast jagged shadows, twisting into grotesque shapes that danced along the damp stone. I was here, in this wretched workshop, with sweat dripping down my back and fear gnawing at the edges of my resolve. I felt it, the weight of a life unchosen, and the suffocating silence that always followed a mistake. "Focus, Rhea," shouted Malachi, his voice slicing through the haze of nervous energy. He was a towering figure, his broad shoulders hunched over the anvil, hammering away with relentless precision. Each strike was a reminder that this was no ordinary training, it was survival, a battle against the self-doubt that clawed at me. My heart raced, pounding against my ribs like a caged beast, desperate for release. I remember the day I first stepped into this forge, a place of fire and fury. The molten metal glowed like the sun, a stark contrast to the shadows that loomed over us. I had imagined the artistry, the beauty of creation, but now, as I struggled to shape a simple blade, all I felt was the sting of inadequacy. My fingers trembled as I grasped the hot iron, the searing heat biting into my skin. "Again!" Malachi barked, his voice sharp as the tools scattered around us. I could see the disappointment etched on his face, the lines of frustration deepening. I didn't want to let him down. I didn't want to be another ghost of failure haunting this place. But it wasn't just my pride on the line. It was the fate of my family, the legacy they had built. I could almost hear my father's voice, a whisper from the past, urging me to be better. "You carry our name in your hands, Rhea. Don't let it crumble." I remembered the warmth of his embrace, the way he'd tell stories of heroes and legends, their swords gleaming in the sun. But here, in this dim workshop, I felt like none of those heroes, just a girl lost in a world of smoke and metal, fumbling for my place. Beside me, Raylan worked with an intensity that bordered on mania. He was brilliant but reckless, the kind of apprentice who danced too close to the flame, drawn to its pull like a moth. I watched him with a mix of envy and admiration, his hands moving with a grace I could only dream of. "You have to let the metal speak to you," he had said once, his voice low, eyes wide with fervor. "It tells you what it wants to be." But what did I know of listening? My heart was a cacophony of doubt, drowning out any whisper of intuition. I couldn't even hear the metal scream for its form, only my own fear echoing back at me. "Rhea, stop!" Malachi's voice jolted me from my spiraling thoughts. "You're thinking too much. Just strike." His words hung in the air, heavy with truth. I was trapped in the prison of my mind, a swirling vortex of memories and expectations. I remembered the night I decided to leave my home, to step away from the warmth of familiarity and into this suffocating forge. The moon had hung low, casting an eerie glow over the cobblestones as I walked away from everything I knew. The sound of the hammer rang louder, a heartbeat in the darkness. I forced my breath to steady, to find the rhythm, to lose myself in the act. I swung the hammer, feeling the weight of it, allowing the familiar strike to drown out my doubts, again and again. The metal was hot, the sparks flying like tiny stars, each one a fleeting moment of hope. "Good," Malachi said, his voice softer now, tinged with something like encouragement. "Feel the rhythm. Let it guide you." I shut my eyes for a moment, surrendering to the heat, to the thrum of my heartbeat, the chaos of the forge. In that moment, I felt a small flicker of courage. I could almost hear my father's laughter, a memory wrapped in warmth. And yet, shadows lingered. Raylan had been silent for too long. I glanced over, and my heart dropped. He stood frozen, staring at a hissing pot of molten metal, a wild look in his eyes. "Raylan!" I shouted, but the words came too late. The inferno erupted, flames licking at the walls as he lunged forward, trying to salvage what was lost. Panic surged through me, urging me to move, to help, but my feet were rooted in place, my mind racing through 100 possibilities, each more horrifying than the last. "Get back!" Malachi roared, shoving me aside as he lunged toward Raylan. I watched, terror clawing at my throat, as the fire devoured everything in its path, consuming the very air we breathed. The workshop trembled, the heat unbearable. In that chaotic moment, I felt the weight of all my failures crashing down. Was this what it meant to learn the craft? To train under the oppressive weight of fear? To watch as the flames of ambition turned to ash? I could see it, the ghost of my doubt circling, whispering sinister promises of inadequacy. But then, through the haze of smoke, I saw it, the flicker of resilience in Malachi's eyes. He was a storm of determination, battling against the raging fire as he pulled Raylan to safety. In that moment, I realized we were all tangled in this web of struggle, bound by the same fear that threatened to consume us. Maybe learning the craft wasn't just about mastering the tools, it was about facing the fire, about rising from the ashes of our failures, no matter how daunting it seemed. In the chaos, I felt a surge of strength, a rush of adrenaline, and suddenly, I was moving. I was no longer a bystander in my own life. Together? I shouted, my voice rising above the chaos, a rallying cry against despair. And in that moment, as we fought against the flames, I knew we were learning to survive, learning to forge our own destinies, even in the darkest of places. The fire raged on, but we were not merely its victims. We were its challengers. Each strike of the hammer resonated deeper, echoing the heartbeat of our shared struggle, a testament to our will to endure. The forge was our crucible, and we would emerge from it, forged anew, bound by our scars and by our triumphs, unbreakable. The stench of desperation clung to the air like a thick fog, suffocating and unrelenting. In the corner of the sterile clinic, a woman sat hunched over, her fingers trembling around a crumpled piece of paper that had once been a promise of choice, of control, of hope. The clock ticked menacingly, each second echoing in the cavernous silence, reminding her that time was not on her side. Her heart thudded heavily against her ribcage, a metronome marking the rhythm of her fear. I remember the way her breath quickened as the nurse approached, a ghostly figure draped in white that hovered over her like a spectre. The nurse's eyes held a mixture of compassion and indifference, a reflection of societal expectations that had been drilled into every woman since birth. Don't cry. Don't complain. Just bear it. You have to understand, the nurse said, her voice a clinical drone. This is for your own good. But what good? What purpose? The woman's name was Clara. No, not just a name. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, a human being lost in a labyrinth of judgment and fear. Her dark curls fell into her eyes as she shook her head, tears brimming, threatening to spill over the edges of her resolve. I can't, she whispered, her voice breaking like fragile glass. I can't do this. Outside, the city pulsed with life, indifferent to her struggle. Cars honked, people shouted, and laughter erupted like fireworks. But within those walls, Clara was drowning. I remember the way I wanted to reach out, to tell her that I understood, how society had branded her, how the shame wrapped around her like chains that constricted her every move. And there, in the waiting room, a spectre of a different kind loomed. Sarah, her eyes wide and haunted, sat fidgeting with the frayed hem of her shirt. She was the unplanned pregnancy, an unwanted fragment of a life that had spiraled into chaos, and with every tick of the clock, she felt the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. I'm going to be a mother, she murmured to herself, the words tasting like ash. I'm going to be a mother. But her heartbeat screamed, no. No. Not yet. She was 20, a college dropout, a waitress with dreams as fragile as the glasses she carried. What will they think? The question looped in her mind, a relentless mantra. I remember the faces of her family, the whispers, the pointed fingers. The world viewed her as a vessel, a mere function of her biology, existing to fulfill a role that was never hers to choose. Their expectations clawed at her insides, each one a reminder that she was not just Sarah, she was the embodiment of a stigma that had followed every woman through generations. The nurse's footsteps echoed in the hallway, a steady beat that matched the frantic rhythm of Sarah's heart. She could see it now, the judgment in her mother's gaze, the disappointment in her father's voice. The walls closed in, and she could feel the suffocating pressure of societal norms pressing against her chest. Clara, she called out, her voice raw with vulnerability, are you okay? But Clara was lost in her own torment, a whirlwind of thoughts and feelings battling for space in her mind. The truth was, she wasn't okay. She was terrified of what lay ahead, of the choices that had been stripped from her, of the future that seemed to loom like a dark shadow. What if they find out? Her eyes searched for solace in Sarah's gaze, but all she found was a mirror reflecting her own fears. Together, they were two sides of the same coin, bound by an invisible thread that connected their struggles. I remember the way the air crackled between them, heavy with unspoken words and shared despair. They were both caught in a societal web woven with the threads of stigma and fear, a tapestry of roles they never asked to play. The nurse returned with a clipboard, a grimace painted on her face, as if she were delivering a death sentence. "All right, ladies," she said, her tone clipped, "let's get started." The words hung in the air, and in that moment, the world outside faded away. The bustling city became an echo, a distant memory, as Clara and Sarah braced themselves for the storm. The clinic became a battleground, the walls closing in like an arena where they were forced to fight for their own autonomy against an army of expectations. I remember Clara's eyes meeting Sarah's, a flicker of understanding passing between them, an acknowledgement that they were not alone, that their pain was shared. The nurse's voice became a distant hum as the weight of the moment pressed down on them, heavy and suffocating, yet oddly liberating. "I refuse to be just a statistic," Sarah whispered, her resolve hardening like steel. "I refuse to be defined by their judgments." Clara's heart raced, and in that heartbeat, the world shifted. "I'm not going to let them take my choice away," she declared, her voice stronger now, an ember igniting into flame. "I am more than what they want me to be." And in that moment of defiance, a sense of power surged within them, a flicker of hope in the darkness. They were not just women facing a crisis, they were warriors, and this was their battle cry against the tides of stifling expectations. Yet, the clock continued to tick, relentless and unyielding. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that danced to a rhythm of their own. The world continued to spin, oblivious to the storm brewing within those four walls. But within Clara and Sarah, a reckoning was unfolding, a quiet revolution sparked by the rawness of their emotions. They were on the brink of discovering that their worth transcended the expectations laid upon them, that they were the authors of their own narratives, and no stigma could define them. The nurse's voice broke through the haze, a haunting reminder that choices had consequences, and time was slipping away. But the confrontation loomed, and as the shadows lengthened, Clara and Sarah stood on the precipice of their own truths, ready to confront the world that had tried to cage them. "This is just the beginning," Clara thought, feeling the weight of her heartbeat in rhythm with Sarah's. And in that shared silence, they understood, this was their story, their fight, and it was far from over. The night was still, an oppressive silence wrapping the small clinic like a shroud. I remember the thud of the door slamming against the wall, the echo ricocheting off the sterile, cold linoleum floor. My heart raced, hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, desperate for escape. "I can't breathe," Sarah gasped, clutching her chest, eyes wide and terrified. The words clawed at my throat, a cruel reminder of the fragility of life, a stark contrast to the vibrancy just minutes before. She was my sister, my closest friend in this chaotic world, and the sight of her struggling, fighting for air, incited a primal fear deep within me. I remember the azure of her scrubs, once so comforting, now felt like a shroud of impending doom. I reached for her, but my hands trembled like leaves caught in a tempest. "Stay with me, Sarah," I pleaded, my voice cracking like a fragile twig, "just hold on." With every breath she took, I felt my own pulse quicken, the clock ticking mercilessly as if it, too, knew the stakes. "Why didn't you study harder?" The thought sliced through my mind, sharp and unforgiving. I had always brushed off the intricacies of anatomy, skimming through textbooks filled with diagrams that felt like riddles unsolvable. I remember the faces of my professors, their voices fading into a whisper, their warnings drowned out by my own distractions. "Know the body," they had said, "or the body will betray you." Betrayal was creeping in, uninvited and vicious. I glanced at the surgical instruments laid out like soldiers awaiting battle, shiny and pristine, but they felt like a mockery of my ignorance. Each scalpel, each pair of forceps glinted under the harsh fluorescent lights, a reminder of what I did not understand. I craved knowledge, wanted to clutch at the threads of anatomy, to weave them into a safety net for those I loved. But there was only darkness, only the hollow echo of my failures. "Help me!" Sarah gasped, her voice a haunting wail, cutting through the silence. The pulse oximeter beat frantically, each tone a desperate plea for intervention, for clarity. My mind raced, a whirlwind of thoughts grasping at solutions, yet I was lost in a fog of confusion. The technical jargon spun around me, a foreign language that I had never fully learned. Aspirate, trachea, anaphylaxis, the terms swirled like ghosts, whispers of knowledge that eluded my grasp. The walls closed in, painted in stark white, sterile, suffocating. Memories began to swirl, our childhood, laughter echoing down sunlit hallways, the comfort of sisterhood, the late-night talks about dreams and futures. I remember the way she used to brush my hair, her fingers weaving through the strands like a gentle balm. Now, I was helpless, a spectator in a nightmare that had breached our reality. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch, reaching for us, taunting me with their darkness. "Please, don't leave me," I begged, the words spilling from my lips like a prayer. I reached for her hand, our fingers intertwining, warmth against the cold dread that seeped through the cracks of our lives. I could feel her pulse, fast and shallow, each thud resonating like a drumbeat heralding doom. The irony clawed at my throat. I had spent years chasing dreams, yet here I was, paralyzed by my own shortcomings, by a lack of understanding that felt like an anchor dragging me into the depths. The sound of footsteps slammed into my consciousness, sharp and urgent. Dr. Harris appeared, a whirlwind of competence and authority, but even his presence felt like a flimsy hope. "What did you administer?" he barked, assessing Sarah's condition, his eyes scanning her pale face, searching for answers that I should have known. I didn't know," I stammered, my voice catching in my throat, a dam of shame overflowing. I felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on me, suffocating, a relentless tide pulling me under. Dr. Harris moved with the precision of a trained soldier, each action fluid and decisive, yet I could see the flicker of unease in his eyes. I watched, paralyzed, as he positioned himself, his hands deftly working to stabilize her. I could almost hear the clock ticking, each second an eternity, each breath a haunting reminder of how little I truly understood. This was anatomy in its rawest form, a dance between life and death, and I was fumbling in the dark, a child in a world of shadows. "Is it too late?" The question trembled on my lips, a whisper barely audible over the cacophony of the moment. But deep down, I feared the answer. I feared the truth that lay behind the veil of ignorance. The truth that knowledge could have been my sword, my shield, and instead, it was a burden, dragging me further into despair. The room was charged with tension, heavy with the weight of unspoken fears and unfulfilled promises. Time warped and twisted, elongating every heartbeat until it felt like an eternity. I remember the feeling of helplessness, a specter that clung to my shoulders, whispering cruel reminders of my inadequacies. If only I had listened. If only I had taken it seriously. The regrets piled on, a mountain of what-ifs and if-onlys that threatened to bury me alive. As Dr. Harris shouted orders, the chaos swirled around me, a maelstrom of urgency. I stood at the precipice, teetering between the desire to leap into action and the paralyzing fear of failure. My sister's breath was a ghostly whisper now, fading like a dying ember. Everything spiraled into a haunting dance of desperation, a relentless tide clawing at my sanity. I remember how small I felt, how powerless against the tidal wave of medical complications that I had never truly grasped. The shadows deepened, and in that moment, I realized the true cost of ignorance, the terrifying implications of a lack of medical knowledge. It wasn't just a lack of facts, it was the difference between life and death, between hope and despair. And as I stood there, paralyzed by my own shortcomings, I felt the weight of the cosmos pressing down on my shoulders, the vast universe bearing witness to my failure. The air is thick with the metallic scent of fear, a promise of something dark lingering just beneath the surface. A baby cries, each shriek a piercing reminder of desperation, as if echoing through a cavern of shadows, reverberating off the walls of a dimly lit hospital room. The sterile smell of antiseptic mixes with the warmth of spilled dreams, pooling on the floor beneath the weight of hope and dread. I remember all too vividly the moment I first held my child, that fragile being, so small and perfect, a life-whispering potential, yet carrying the gravity of my every mistake. Elena stands there, anchored in that sterile room, the monitor beeping in frantic rhythm, each beep a heartbeat ticking away the seconds, the minutes that feel like a lifetime. Her hands tremble, knuckles white against the soft cotton of her hospital gown, the fabric a fragile barrier against the storm roiling inside her chest. She watches the tiny being, wrapped in a blanket like a precious jewel, and panic claws at her throat. What if I can't protect you? The thought flashes like lightning, bright and unforgiving, illuminating the fears she's buried deep. Across the room, Jake paces, his footsteps echoing with a hollow urgency. He's supposed to be the rock, the steady presence, but today he's just a man in a storm, uncertain and desperate. The weight of his own responsibilities hangs heavily on his shoulders. He glances at Elena, sees the shadows under her eyes, the worry etched into her features, and it crushes him. I can't lose you both. I can't. The words tear from his throat, raw and ragged. He remembers nights spent counting the walls in his mind, counting the chances, knowing they were running out. In the corner of the room, a clock ticks like a metronome, marking time, a relentless reminder of each passing moment. Elena's hands fly to her hair, twisting the strands in agitation. What if she needs something I can't give her? The question hangs in the air, pregnant with fears of inadequacy, of being unprepared in a world so full of uncertainties. Look at her, Jake urges, his voice low, tinged with desperation. She's here. He steps closer, peering into the swaddled bundle, his heart aching at the sight. The world outside continues its relentless march, indifferent to the miracle unfolding within these four walls. He catches a glimpse of the delicate little fingers curled tightly, as if holding on to the very essence of life itself. We'll figure this out, he insists, but the words feel hollow, a makeshift bandage over an open wound. Elena's gaze flicks to him, the flicker in her eyes a cauldron of love and fear, like a storm brewing on the horizon. What if I'm not enough? The words spill from her lips, soaked in vulnerability. Her thoughts spiral, drowning in memories of her own mother's struggles, the echoes of inadequacy that resonate louder than any soothing lullaby. What if I fail her? Time stretches, thickening and swirling around them, suffocating yet intoxicating. The sound of the baby's cries morphs into a haunting melody that lingers long after silence falls. Those cries are not just cries, they are manifestations of all that is at stake, all that they could lose. Each note plays a different fear, the fear of illness, the fear of judgment, the fear of the invisible predators lurking in the shadows of parenting, waiting to pounce. In a flicker of moments, Elena is transported back to her childhood. She remembers the sound of the clock in her mother's kitchen, counting down the seconds while her mother worked tirelessly, her back bent under the weight of dreams deferred. I remember the weight of expectation, she whispers, her voice a soft tremor against the backdrop of beeping machines. The baby's small hand twitches, a fragile gasp of life, and for a brief second, the world narrows down to that singular moment. Elena lets out a breath she didn't know she was holding. I have to be strong for her, she says, though the tremor of her voice betrays her resolve. She reaches down, brushing a finger against the baby's soft cheek. The warmth radiates, igniting something in her that had lain dormant for too long. Every moment counts, Jake murmurs, and he steps closer, placing a hand over Elena's. Together, they lean over their daughter, the three of them forming a fragile barrier against the chaos outside, against the expectations of a world that never sleeps. We can't let the fear win. With each passing heartbeat, they find themselves threading through the fabric of their memories, haunted yet somehow illuminated by the fear of failure. Jake remembers how he felt back in college, stumbling through classes, convinced his dreams were out of reach. I was never the best, he confesses, the words spilling out like a confession under the flickering fluorescent lights. But I fought for what mattered. She's what matters now. Elena nods, a flicker of understanding passing between them, an unspoken promise. She feels the stirrings of courage, though fear remains a heavy cloak draped over her shoulders. Each inhale is a battle, each exhale a release. I just don't want to fail her, she whispers again, the words haunting them like a ghost. The cries of the baby crescendo, piercing through the thick veil of their fears, and in that moment, they both understand the stakes. It isn't just about survival, it's about love, about nurturing in a world that can feel so cruel. The silence that follows is heavy with unspoken words, a tapestry of shared fears and dreams interwoven with the threads of new beginnings. And so they stand, suspended in that fragile moment, clinging to each other, to their daughter, who is both a promise and a burden. The shadows stretch and twist around them, the clock continues its relentless ticking, and outside the world moves on, indifferent. But here, in this pocket of chaos and love, they find a flicker of hope, an ember in the darkness that refuses to be snuffed out. The walls pulse with the weight of uncertainty, and a part of them continues to wonder what lies ahead. They are both terrified and exhilarated, standing between the past and an uncertain future, and the stakes have never felt higher. The clock ticks with a rhythm that thrums in the hollow of my chest, each second a reminder of the walls closing in, the weight of laws and doctrines pressing down like a leaden shroud. I stand on the edge of the church steps, adrenaline surging, heart racing wildly. The air is thick with tension, heavy like the clouds before a storm, and the scent of wet earth and looming dread mingles with the incense of forgotten prayers. I remember the whispers, those hushed voices that haunt the corners of my mind. You can't. You mustn't. The doctrine, an unyielding chain, coils around my throat. They say faith can move mountains, but here, faith erects barriers as tall as the steeple above me. And standing beside me, Sarah's eyes blaze with defiance, a flicker in the darkness, yet I see the doubt gnawing at her heart. There's a battle raging inside her, an internal war that mirrors the conflict brewing in the town. I can't do this anymore, Luke, she hisses, her voice a mix of anger and desperation. What if we're wrong? What if the church is right? The question hangs in the air, a spectre of fear that refuses to be banished. Her courage is slipping through her fingers like sand, and I want to reach out, to anchor her, but the weight of her hesitation drags me down, too. I think of the rules, the archaic laws that dictate our existence, the relentless grip of the church's doctrine. They say the love we feel is sinful, that our very existence is a blasphemy against the heavens. I remember the sermons, the fire and brimstone, the way the preacher's voice would quake with righteous fury, each word a dagger aimed at the hearts of those who dare defy. You are an abomination, he thundered, eyes blazing with zeal. Turn away from this path, or suffer the consequences. But consequences, what do they even mean? I've seen the light flicker in Sarah's eyes, it's the same light that danced in my own when we first dared to dream of a life unfettered by the chains of these walls. I can't let it go. I won't. Sarah, I say, my voice low, steady despite the chaos swirling within me. What if the church is wrong? What if we've been given this love for a reason? Her gaze pierces mine, seeking truth, but all she finds is the trembling uncertainty that I, too, grapple with. Outside, the shadows lengthen, creeping like dark fingers along the cobblestone, a silent reminder of the danger lurking beyond our fragile walls. The townsfolk are gathering, their murmurs rising like a tide, a chorus of judgment echoing through the air. They've heard the rumors, the whispers of our love, and with every passing moment, the weight of their scrutiny becomes unbearable. Luke, they won't understand, she pleads, her voice breaking like fragile glass. They'll tear us apart. Each word stabs at my heart, a reminder of the reality we face. I remember the boy who had dared to love openly, only to be cast out, a pariah in the eyes of a community that once embraced him. They called it a sin, but all I could see was the light fading from his eyes, the joy stripped away until nothing remained but despair. I glanced toward the horizon, where the sun dips low, casting a crimson hue over the town, a warning, perhaps, of the battles yet to come. The clock strikes, the sound echoing like a death knell, and I feel the pulse of time quicken, a relentless reminder that our moment is slipping away. With every heartbeat, a choice hovers between us, a precipice from which we may never return. The doctrine looms behind us, a dark cloud, but love stands as our shield. I can't help but think, if we cannot find our freedom in the embrace of each other, then what is the worth of existence? Together, I whisper, and in that single word, I summon the courage that we both desperately need. We can face them together. But doubt clings to her like a shroud. I see it in her eyes, the flickers of hope and fear locked in a deadly embrace. What if it's too late? No, I say, the word bursting forth, fiery and urgent. It's never too late. They can take our names, our lives, but they cannot take what we feel. That is ours. In that heartbeat, we stand on the edge of everything. The air crackles with the electricity of impending confrontation, the tension thick enough to choke. I feel the ghosts of our past swirl around us, shadows of love that have been lost to the ages, yet here we are, defiant and raw, daring to stand in the face of an unyielding doctrine that seeks to bind us. The crowd outside is restless now, voices rising in an angry swell, and I know they are coming for us. I can almost hear the words, poisonous and sharp, aimed at our hearts like arrows. Sinners! Wretched! You're going to hell! Each accusation reverberates through the air, a cacophony of judgment that threatens to drown out the truth of our love. Luke! Sarah's voice, strained and panic-laden, pulls me back. What are we going to do? Fight, I reply, igniting the fire of resolve within her. We fight for us, for what we believe in. We fight or we fade into the shadows. In that moment, I see the flicker of defiance rekindle in Sarah's eyes, a spark that can ignite a wildfire of hope. We might be outnumbered, but we are not alone. We have each other, and in this world governed by fear, that might be enough. As the doors swing open, the darkness spills into the church, a flood of voices and accusations crashing against the very foundation of our being. The weight of the church's doctrine presses upon us, the laws written in ancient texts, but as we stand together, I feel the chains begin to rattle. This is our moment, fear and love intertwined, a tempest waiting to break. We are not just two souls caught in a storm, we are the storm itself, ready to unleash chaos upon the rigid confines of a world that has always tried to silence us. And so we step forward, arms linked, hearts pounding, ready to navigate the legal and religious restrictions that loom before us, unyielding and fierce. We may stumble, we may fall, but we will rise again, for love is a fire that cannot be extinguished. It burns bright, a beacon in the darkness, and we will not let it fade. The air was thick with a tension that stung the back of my throat, a miasma of desperation swirling like the shadows that flickered in the dim light. Outside, the world had become a ghost town, every street echoing with the silence of abandoned hopes. The market lay bare, its stalls stripped of color, of life. Where bounty once flourished, now stood only the ghosts of wilted herbs, their fragrance faded into the cruel void. I stood there, heart pounding like a war drum, my eye scanning the remnants of what was once vibrant, dried rosemary, crumbling sage, and the last desperate breaths of lavender. I could hear her voice, Tamsin's voice, whispering in my mind, her hands graceful as they plucked the finest leaves, their sheer essence barely contained in glass vials, miracles in a bottle. Herbs are not just a remedy, she'd say, her eyes shining with an intensity that could ignite the very sun. They're a lifeline. But today, the lifeline hung by a thread, frayed and trembling. Supplies were gone, stripped bare by fear, by greed, every last leaf snatched away in a frenzy of panic. And I, standing there, a hollow shell of my former self, could do nothing but watch as the darkness crept closer, whispering fears that clawed at my insides. I remember the day it all began, the day when whispers of a shortage sent shivers through our community. The news broke like glass, shattering the fragile peace, the dim light of hope extinguished. Tamsin had rushed to my side, eyes wide with a terror that danced on the edge of madness. "We have to act," she gasped, her voice a desperate plea as we stood shoulder to shoulder, the world closing in. "If we don't find a way to gather what's left, it's over. People will suffer." But as days turned into weeks, the shelves remained empty. I could feel the pulse of that emptiness, thrumming in my veins. Each morning, I would rise before dawn, the soft glow of the horizon a cruel reminder of what was lost. I would sift through the remnants of Tamsin's garden, her sanctuary, where petals kissed by sunlight once danced in the wind. Now, it felt like an abandoned battlefield, every wilting flower a victim of neglect, faded, forgotten, like dreams slipping through desperate fingers. Desperation became my constant companion, and I was not alone. Samuel, his strong hands now trembling, had come to me, a fortress of grief. "Have you heard?" he asked one evening, the shadows weaving through his voice. "They're hoarding the last supplies. We need to fight back." His eyes were wild, a storm brewing beneath the surface. "Tamsin wouldn't want this. We can't let her legacy disappear." And there we were, two lost souls in a landscape of despair, clinging to the fraying edges of hope. A plan formed between us, fragile yet electric, as we navigated the razor-wire tension that crackled in the air. We would gather what we could, barter with those willing to share their secrets, even at the risk of betrayal. Every step was a dance with fate, each heartbeat a reminder of the stakes, our friends, our families, our way of life hanging in the balance. But betrayal lurked in the shadows, waiting for its moment. The other villagers, once allies, began to turn, driven mad by the gnawing hunger for survival. I remember the night we confronted them, the cold moon casting a pallid light over our faces, each of us a spectre of our former selves. "We're all in this together," I pleaded, the words slipping from my lips like fragile leaves in the wind. "We can share our resources." But their eyes were hard, reflecting only greed, only fear. "You don't know what it's like," one of them spat, anger mixing with desperation. "You sit in your garden, but we're the ones who are suffering." And with that, the tension snapped like a taut string, and chaos erupted. Voices rose, fists clenched, bodies colliding in a whirlwind of rage and heartbreak. I felt the weight of it all, the loss of trust, the shattering of a community forged in shared battles, crushing my chest. Yet in that chaos, I caught a glimpse of Tamsin, her laughter ringing through my mind. "It's not just the herbs, it's the connections we make," she had said, her eyes alight with passion. "It's about love, and sacrifice, and knowing that we are stronger together." But now, in this moment of madness, I questioned everything. What did it mean to be strong when the very foundation of our unity crumbled before us? I remember feeling lost, the ground beneath my feet shifting like sand, trust slipping away like smoke through my fingers. As the night wore on, Samuel and I found ourselves huddled in the dark, adrenaline coursing through our veins like wildfire. "We can't let them win," he whispered, a fierce determination shining in his eyes. "We will find a way." But the words felt hollow, echoing in the vast emptiness that surrounded us. We had become ghosts in our own lives, haunted by the reality that our access to resources was dwindling, as if the universe conspired against us. I closed my eyes, breathing in the memories of Tamsin's garden, the vibrant colors and the intoxicating scents that had once wrapped around me like a warm embrace. I held onto them fiercely, as if they were the last pieces of light in a world cloaked in shadows. And as dawn crept toward us, its first rays casting a fragile glow over the wasteland we'd become, I felt it, the stirring of something deep within. A flicker of resolve ignited in my chest, a whisper of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could fight back against the encroaching darkness. But in that moment, I also understood the bitter truth: the battle was just beginning. We were teetering on the edge of an abyss, and the only way out was through the storm that threatened to consume us. The tension crackled like electricity, the air heavy with the weight of what was yet to come. And as I stood on the precipice, I couldn't shake the feeling that fate was watching, waiting for us to make our next move. The clock was ticking, shadows lengthening, and the hunger for herbal remedies was just the beginning. In the chaos of survival, everything we held dear hung in the balance, ready to unravel at the slightest touch. We were no longer just seeking herbs, we were fighting for our very souls. The air hangs heavy, thick with the scent of decay and despair, as night drapes its inky fingers over the city. A child's laughter echoes, sharp and jarring against the silence, a fleeting reminder of innocence lost. It pierces through the gloom, and I shiver, not from the chill, but from the realization of what's to come. Shadows flit across cobblestones, whispering secrets, while the moon, a ghostly eye, watches as we falter. I remember when the sickness first crept in, silent and insidious. It slithered through alleys and halls, a wraith caressing the living, its breath a rasp against our throats. I was just a boy then, a reckless child, blissfully ignorant of the horrors that lay ahead. I remember my sister's laughter, echoing through our cramped home, a sound now choked by the disease that gnawed at our neighbors, our friends. How could something so invincible, so haunting, lie coiled within the very walls that sheltered us? Today, I stand beside my father, a man worn thin like a frayed rope, his eyes hollowed by loss and fear. We scour the streets, desperate to find whatever scraps of life remain. "Stay close," he whispers, voice barely above a whisper, each word a trembling leaf caught in an autumn wind. But how can I stay close when the world is unraveling, when death lurks behind every door? Each step is a prayer, a plea to the heavens that the next house will hold joy instead of sorrow. Instead, we find the stillness that follows a storm, bodies wrapped in blankets, faces pale like the moon. I remember the touch of my sister's hand, warm and soft, before the sickness came. Now, I only feel the coldness of the city, an echo of what once was. There's a man, a neighbor, face twisted in agony, his breath rasping like a dying ember. I remember saying hello to him just last week. Now he's a ghost, a memory fading like the last light of day. My father grips my shoulder tightly, and I can almost feel the warmth seep from his fingers. "We can't save them, son," he murmurs, the weight of those words settling heavy in the air. "We have to keep moving." There's a woman, her eyes wild as she stands amidst the bodies, clutching a doll to her chest, as if it could stave off the pain. I see her face, twisted in grief, and I feel a pang in my heart for her loss, her madness. The doll is a relic of a time before the world fell apart, a remnant of laughter that now rings hollow. She stumbles back, her foot catching on the edge of sanity, and I want to reach out, to offer solace, but fear grips my throat. What if the sickness resides in her touch? What if death is contagious? But I see the flicker of defiance in her eyes, a glimpse of hope amid chaos, and it ignites something within me. "It's not over yet," I shout, the words bursting from my lips like a firecracker in the stillness. My father's grip tightens, but I push forward, feeling the weight of her gaze on my back. "We must fight." And just like that, we are a chorus of voices, lifting the burden of despair. We gather others, those few still standing, the baker, the blacksmith, the seamstress, each face etched with lines of hardship. When we come together, it feels like the first light of dawn, a fragile flame against the encroaching darkness. But darkness is relentless. I watch the blacksmith collapse, a great man brought low by an unseen force, and something inside me shatters. In this moment, I am alive, yet I feel the echoes of death reverberating through my soul. I remember the stories my mother told, tales woven with laughter and light, now tainted by the pallor of loss. They bathed once a year. I want to laugh, so yeah, romance was earthy. But the humor feels misplaced, and the words die in my throat. I turn to my father, his face lined with worry, and I see the flicker of a man fighting against the tide. "You can't lose hope," I say, a desperate plea. "We have to believe in something." But even as I say it, I feel the weight of doubt creeping in, like shadows stretching across the ground. How do we hold on to hope when the world feels so cruel? Then comes the night when the moon hides, and the stars blink out, one by one. We gather at the town square, a collection of the broken and battered, our hearts beating as one. The air is electric, charged with something unnameable, a mixture of fear and resolve. I scan the faces around me, searching for the spark that will ignite a fire within, but see only anguish. We stand on the brink, teetering between despair and defiance, a fragile thread binding us together. And then, the scream. It slices through the night, a raw, primal sound that sends a shiver down my spine. It's a sound of pure terror, echoing through the lanes, and I turn toward the source, heart racing, breath caught. A figure, cloaked in shadows, stumbles into the square. A messenger? A harbinger? The air grows thick with fear, a palpable thing that wraps around us. I remember the stories of old, of the black death that swept through like wildfire, leaving nothing but ash in its wake. We are the echoes of history repeating, the specters of those who came before us. Will we become mere footnotes in the annals of time? Stay strong. Fight! I scream, my voice a thread weaving through the chaos, but inside, I feel the tremors of doubt. Each heartbeat is a reminder, each breath a challenge. I close my eyes, and in that moment, I grasp the fragile essence of humanity, the will to survive against the onslaught of mortality. We are not just victims, we are warriors in a battle that feels insurmountable. And as the darkness envelops us, I cling to the flicker of hope, to the laughter that once filled this town, to the love that dwells in the heart even when the world crumbles. The nightmare stretches on, but the fight is far from over. Each heartbeat echoes in the void, a reminder that we are alive, and we will not be forgotten. The fluorescent lights flickered above, casting stark shadows that danced menacingly across the sterile walls. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic, but beneath it lay a more primal odor, fear. I found myself in the chaos of the emergency room, heart hammering against my ribs like a caged bird, every beat a reminder that time was slipping away. Miranda, my best friend and fellow nurse, stood frozen beside me, her eyes wide with disbelief as the doctor barked orders. The tension crackled in the air like static, ready to ignite into a storm. "Move," he shouted, and we rushed to follow. The patient on the gurney, a young mother, pale and gasping, was a tapestry of desperation woven with threads of terror. I could feel the weight of her fear pressing against my chest, squeezing the breath from my lungs. I remember thinking, if only I could take her pain, wrap it in my own soul and bear it for her. But there was no time for heroics, the clock was ticking, and the physician was already maneuvering with a precision that felt rehearsed, practiced. And then came the moment, the unbearable instant where I let my heart speak, a whisper of rebellion against the authority looming all around us. "I can help," I said, my voice raw with urgency, a frantic plea to be seen, to be valued. The doctor turned, his gaze slicing through me like a scalpel. "Stay in your lane, nurse," he snapped, dismissing me with an arrogance that stung deeper than any wound I had ever bandaged. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, a familiar rush of humiliation mixed with rage coursing through me. Miranda touched my arm, her grip a lifeline in the sea of chaos. "Don't let him get to you," she whispered, but her voice was drowned out by the cacophony of beeping machines and the stifled cries of the waiting room. I glanced at her, the unshed tears shimmering in her eyes, a mirror of my own turmoil. We were caught in this turbulent dance, a twisted ballet of power and silence, where our voices were muffled and our worth measured against the authority of white coats. I remember my mother's words, echoing like a mantra in my mind, "You were born to heal." But here, in this battlefield, healing felt like a privilege only the physicians could wield. The hierarchy twisted my sense of self, and I stood at the base of this towering edifice, a mere footnote in the grand narrative of medicine. Hours blurred into a cacophony of code blues and whispered prayers, sweat dripping from my brow as I worked tirelessly, yet I could feel the walls closing in. Each patient was a reminder of the stakes, life and death balanced on the edge of a scalpel. But what about us? Where did that leave Miranda and me, the warriors in scrubs? Were we battling against ghosts, echoes of a system designed to belittle us? As the night wore on, the weight of our unspoken frustrations began to crack the thin veneer of professionalism. Why do they act like we're not even here? Miranda's voice trembled, a mix of anger and vulnerability. Like we're just side characters in this sick drama. The frustration burst like a dam, flooding the sterile room with raw emotion. I nodded, understanding her pain, feeling it echo in the chambers of my own heart. Then came the confrontation, a low rumble that began to build in intensity, a storm ready to break. The attending physician had just scolded a student, dismissing his questions with an icy glare that sent shivers down my spine. "What do you think this is, a playground? Stick to the script." His voice boomed, and the student, barely out of medical school, shrank beneath the onslaught, eyes wide and terrified. That was when the fracture appeared, a crack in the facade of unyielding authority. I stepped forward, an act of defiance bubbling up like lava, threatening to erupt. He was simply asking for clarity. "We all want to learn." The room fell silent, 1,000 breaths held as the echoes of my words lingered in the air. Every gaze turned to me, shock mingled with disbelief, and I felt the blood rush to my cheeks once more. The physician's eyes narrowed, a predator sizing up his prey. "You're out of line," he spat, venom lacing his words. But I could feel the adrenaline surging, a fierce tide of righteousness sweeping away the fear. "No, you're out of touch," I shot back, and in that moment, I saw it, the flicker of recognition in the eyes of my fellow nurses, a spark igniting a fire we had buried deep within. Miranda stepped beside me, her shoulders squared, her heart beating in time with mine. "We deserve to be heard," she echoed, and suddenly we weren't alone. Other voices joined ours, a chorus of dissent rising against the oppressive silence. The energy shifted, a palpable tension crackling in the air, like the charged atmosphere before a storm. It was no longer just about the turf wars that defined our existence, it was about reclaiming our identities, our right to occupy a space that had long been denied to us. Our professions were not mere roles to be filled but sacred vocations that demanded respect, recognition, and, most importantly, collaboration. But even in that moment of triumph, the shadows of gender dynamics lingered like specters, whispering doubts and fears into the corners of my mind. Would we be vilified for our rebellion? Would this moment of courage come at a cost? I felt the weight of history bearing down on us, centuries of women silenced, dismissed, their contributions forever overshadowed by the towering figures in white coats. And yet, as we stood there, a united front against the tide of tradition, I understood that this was merely the beginning. The confrontation was a spark, a catalyst for change that would ripple through the fabric of our profession. No easy resolutions awaited us, only the raw, unvarnished truth of our struggles, the relentless fight for recognition that still lay ahead. I remember the clock ticking, each second marking a heartbeat of defiance, a rhythm underscoring our resolve. We weren't here to serve quietly, we were here to demand respect, to carve our names into the annals of medicine. As the physician glared at us, I felt a surge of power, the knowledge that we were no longer just specters in the background. We were warriors in scrubs, ready to fight for our place in the world. And as the confrontation simmered into a dark night, I held on to that feeling, the raw, unfiltered promise of change, the pulse of something greater than the sum of our fears. We would not go quietly. We were just beginning. The clock ticks louder, an ominous drumbeat echoing through the dimly lit room where Sarah sits, a simmering pot of anxiety on the edge of boiling over. The walls, once a sunny yellow, now faded and peeling, close in on her as she stares at the flickering light of her phone, the last lifeline to the outside world, the last remnant of hope in a reality where every message is a reminder of her failing dreams. She can't afford to be late again. She can't afford to miss another shift. Just one more hour, she whispers to herself, but the words taste like ash. Her heart races, a wild horse trapped in a barn, longing to gallop free yet caged by a paycheck that barely scratches the surface of survival. And then, like a cruel joke, a notification pings. Her fingers tremble as she opens it, the message stark and unyielding, "Sorry, we're cutting hours." Effective immediately. The room spins. Hours? What hours? She doesn't have hours. She has bills, looming like dark clouds, ready to burst. I remember, she breathes, the air heavy with the scent of burnt coffee and despair. I remember the day I thought I'd make it. She recalls her dreams, once vivid, like an artist's palette splashed with color. A small gallery, showcasing her work, where each brushstroke tells a story. But dreams don't pay rent, and art doesn't fill the fridge, and now she's left with only shadows of what could have been. Across town, Mark leans against the cold, unforgiving metal of his car, the engine silent, a mockery of his life's ambitions. He had spent years fighting against the tide, pushing through dead-end jobs, sacrificing comfort for the hope of a better future. The weight of 1,000 failures hangs heavy on his shoulders. I remember, he mutters to the windshield, the words barely escaping his cracked lips. I remember when I thought hard work was enough. He recalls his mother's voice, full of promises wrapped in love. If you work hard, son, you'll find your way. But the world had twisted those words, morphing them into something monstrous. Hard work felt like a trembling candle in a storm, flickering, threatening to extinguish with every gust of life's relentless chaos. The city outside hums with a sinister life of its own. Cars zoom past, people rush by, faces blurred, each a ghost of their own struggles, unaware of the pain simmering just below the surface. Mark glances at the empty passenger seat. "Where are you, Jess?" he whispers into the void. Jess, the love of his life, had been the flickering candle he clung to, but the weight of financial instability had snuffed her out, leaving behind an echoing silence. Back in her apartment, Sarah's phone buzzes again, and she flinches, as if struck. Another message. Final notice, pay your rent. Time is a cruel master, and now it feels as if it's laughing at her. The walls seem to whisper her deepest fears, mocking her as she recalls each empty fridge, each night spent counting the coins left in her jar, pennies of broken dreams. I remember, she whispers, the words dissolving into the air. I remember when I thought I could change the world. Every artist has their muse, and Sarah's had been hope, but hope feels distant now, like a star in a polluted sky. Mark's fingers drum nervously against the steering wheel, a rhythm of frustration and dread. He knows the call is coming, the one that could shatter the last fragments of his world. What's it going to be this time? He asks aloud, the question hanging in the air like a spectre. The phone vibrates again, a jolt that sends panic coursing through him. Please, not today, he begs, but reality doesn't care about his pleas. When he finally answers, it's his boss's voice, heavy and strained. We have to cut back, Mark. It's just business. Just business, the words twist like a knife. We're laying off a few people. I'm sorry. He hangs up, the silence swallowing him whole. Just business, he scoffs, the bitterness clinging to the back of his throat. What about my life? My dreams? Outside, the world continues its relentless march, oblivious to the wreckage left in its wake. Each day blends into the next, a monotonous cycle of survival. Sarah stands in front of her easel, paintbrush in hand, staring at the blank canvas. The colors are gone, replaced by a gaping void. Why? She screams, but the question evaporates into the air, unanswered. And in that moment, their stories intertwine, the fabric of their lives woven together by the harsh threads of economic struggle. Sarah and Mark, two souls adrift in a sea of uncertainty, their hearts beating in time with the clock's relentless ticking. Each beat echoes their failures, their fears, and the haunting spectre of what could have been. I remember, they both murmur, the words bittersweet and heavy on their tongues. I remember when the world felt full of possibilities. But now, it feels like a cage, bars formed by bills and stagnant paychecks, each day a struggle against the tide, every moment a fight for survival. The shadows grow longer, stretching across the city, reaching into their lives. And as they navigate the wreckage of dreams, the clock ticks on, a relentless reminder that time waits for no one, especially not for those who have lost their footing in the unforgiving landscape of economic despair. As darkness falls, the weight of their struggle settles in. There are no easy answers, no swift resolutions. Just the painful truth that in a world driven by profit and loss, hope often feels like a distant whisper. And yet, amidst the chaos, the flicker of resilience glimmers, hauntingly beautiful, waiting to ignite once more in a world that feels anything but kind. And so, the clock ticks, the city hums, and the struggle continues, a loop of heartbreak and resilience, echoing into the night. The air hung thick and heavy, a murky fog swirling around the village square, clinging to the cobblestones like a memory that refuses to fade. A woman shrieked, a raw, gut-wrenching sound that echoed against the stone walls, piercing through the day's silence like a knife. They had come for her, the townsfolk, wielding pitchforks and torches, spurred by fear and superstition, their faces contorted by the shadows of their own making. I remember the way the sun dipped low, casting long shadows that twisted like serpents, as Matilda stood, heart racing, sweat slicking her brow. She was the midwife, the healer, the one who brought life into the world, yet here she was, on the cusp of losing everything. The blood had dried on her hands from the last birth, a child delivered safely into the arms of a mother, but now those hands trembled at the sight of angry faces, eyes wild with accusation. Witch, they screamed. Witch, witch, witch! In that moment, clinging to the edge of desperation, Matilda's heart thundered with the weight of 1,000 nights spent tending to the sick, feeling the warmth of new life against her skin, savoring the sweet breath of infants that smelled of promise. Yet now, she stood before the abyss, teetering on the precipice of a reality where all her kindness would be twisted into something sinister. Her thoughts flickered to Alaric, the town's new constable, a man she had once smiled at across the market, his laugh rich like honey, a sound she now wished she could rewind to bottle up and save for a day like today. He was caught between duty and heart, his blue eyes reflecting the turmoil inside as he struggled to maintain order among the throngs. Matilda, he called out, voice low and urgent, please, don't resist. But what did he know of resistance? She was a woman in a world that tore at the seams of compassion, twisted it into a fraying rope of accusations and fear. I'm not a witch, Alaric. I save lives, Silence. The crowd surged, a tide of rage fueled by ignorance, and with it, the fear that clung to her like a shroud. Shadows danced in the torchlight, each flickering flame a reminder of what lay at stake, of the stakes that had burned too many women before her. And in that moment, I remember the chilling stillness that followed, as if the cosmos held its breath, waiting. A child, mere days old, nestled in the crook of her arm, a life so fragile, so full of possibility, and yet so close to shattering. Matilda's heart fractured beneath the weight of the world that claimed her a villain for bringing forth life. Then there was Agnes, the woman who stood by her side, a confidant turned conspirator, her own heart echoing Matilda's fears. She had seen the darkness in men's hearts, the twisting vines of jealousy that suffocated women's dreams. "They'll take you from us, Matilda. They'll take your light," she whispered, her voice trembling, eyes wide with the understanding of ancient whispers and the echo of old tales, the stories of women silenced, their voices curling into the smoke of execution fires. Matilda wanted to scream, to tear down the walls of this nightmare, but instead, she felt the invisible chains tightening around her, each link forged by fear, each link a curse whispered in the dark. The crowd surged again, a living beast of anger and misunderstanding, and she felt the heat of their rage like a brand against her skin. In the back of her mind, the clock ticked, each second reverberating with the memories of laughter, love, and the sweet scent of earth after rain. Time became a cruel mistress, mocking her with the inevitability of the past. "I remember," she thought, "when it was just me and the stars, counting each heartbeat as a promise." "Matilda!" Alaric's voice cut through the chaos, and for a fleeting second, she saw the man beneath the uniform, the boy she had once caught glimpses of in stolen moments. "You have to trust me. I can help you." "Help?" The word tasted bitter on her tongue, a choked promise in a world gone mad. She wanted to believe in him, in his goodness, but how could she trust that which was wrapped in a shroud of duty? The truth was as twisted as the roots of an ancient tree, holding secrets that could break or make a soul. The crowd closed in, a wall of fury and disbelief, and Matilda stood at the center of it all, a lone candle flickering, threatening to extinguish in the storm. She thought of the blood, the lives she had touched, and the love she had given. Was it enough to warm the hearts of those who had turned cold as stone? Fear wrapped around her heart, squeezing tight. She could see the faces of mothers she had helped, the laughter of children born of her hands, and yet none of that mattered now. All that mattered was this moment, the gnashing of teeth and the howls of human nature laid bare, unadorned and ugly. "Witch," they cried, and with each shout, another piece of Matilda shattered, scattering like autumn leaves in the wind. But then, just as the darkness threatened to swallow her whole, she felt a flicker of defiance ignite within her. "I am no witch," she whispered, but the words echoed like a battle cry, each syllable a declaration against the storm and the shadows. And now, she could see it in Alaric's eyes, the glimmering of hope amidst despair, the flicker of humanity in a world steeped in shadows. In that moment, something shifted, an invisible thread weaving between their hearts, binding them together against the tide. The clock continued its relentless ticking, measuring out the seconds of fear and courage, of disbelief and determination, as the confrontation loomed like a storm on the horizon. And as the crowd surged forward, Matilda stood firm, not just a midwife but a warrior, ready to fight not just for her life, but for every woman whose voice had been snuffed out beneath the weight of accusations. Would the flames of truth burn bright enough to push back the dark? Would Alaric find the strength to stand with her, or would he be swept away in the tide of fear? There was no time for answers, only the heartbeats of the moment, echoing in the space between fear and defiance, the line drawn firm between life and death, where uncertainty hung heavily, a breath held in the dark. The small room pulsed with the weight of expectation, a living thing, swaying to the soft, labored breaths of Clara, the air thick with the scent of sweat and fear, the kind of fear that clings to your skin like a second layer. Shadows danced across the walls, flickering in the dim light of a single, flickering bulb, a cruel reminder of the fragility of hope. Clara's fingers dug into the tattered mattress beneath her, nails clawing for some purchase in a world that felt increasingly unsteady. "Breathe, Clara," whispered Ruth, her sister, her voice a thin thread holding them together, frayed and strained. Ruth's eyes were wide, reflecting both the flickering light and the terror that wrapped around her heart like a vice. "Just breathe." But Clara couldn't hear. All she could feel was the tightening in her chest, the crushing sensation of inevitability pushing her deeper into a pit of despair. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The plan had been simple enough: a quiet home birth, a sacred space where the echoes of generations whispered encouragement. But now? Now the walls felt like they were closing in, and the air was suffocating, a noose tightening around her mind, snatching the air right out of her lungs. "You have to push," Ruth half shouted, her own pulse racing, a frantic drummer in the background of this nightmare. "You can do this." But Clara could only see the darkness creeping in, the shadows whispering that she wasn't enough, that this space, a cramped room cluttered with the remnants of their lives, was a prison instead of a sanctuary. A sudden jolt surged through Clara, and she screamed, a sound raw and haunting that sliced through the heavy air like a knife. The pain was a living beast, gnashing its teeth, clawing at her insides. She could feel it tightening around her, a vice, an anchor dragging her down to depths unknown. "I remember," she gasped between contractions, memories flooding back, her mother's voice, soft and full of love. "You were born in the fields, Clara, under the great oak tree, where the sun kissed the earth." The memory was a fragile thread, one that felt impossibly far from the grim reality in this small room, where hope felt like a cruel joke. The walls had seen too much: the deaths, fights, laughter twisted into something bitter. Would it witness another tragedy today? Ruth's hands were shaking as she pressed a cool cloth to Clara's forehead, desperation etched into her features. "Just think of the baby. Think of the joy." Ruth had always been the steady one, the anchor, but even she felt the floor quaking beneath her feet. She looked around, the clutter of their lives pressing closer, the unsanitary realities of their living conditions creeping into her mind like unwelcome guests. A bucket stood in the corner, grimy and half full, a stark reminder of the sanitation woes that clung to their existence like a relentless shadow. It was supposed to be a joyous occasion, but here, in their cramped shelter, every moment felt tainted by the very act of living. "I remember," Clara gasped again, but not the joy, no, it was the memory of the last time they'd been in this house, a funeral instead of a birth. The smell of decay, the whispers of grief, suffocating. "Shut it out," Ruth urged, panic clawing at her throat. "You're stronger than this." But Clara felt herself slipping. Each wave of pain was a reminder of what could go wrong, what had gone wrong before. She could almost hear the echoes of the ones who had not been so lucky, the ghosts of desperate women who had birthed not in the soft embrace of a loved one's arms but in the cold grip of despair. The weight of it pressed down on her, a stifling blanket soaked in dread. Another contraction rolled through her, and she screamed again, a primal sound that reverberated off the walls, pushing against the boundaries of their tiny world. "I can't! I can't!" The words poured out like a flood, a torrent of fear and uncertainty. "What if?" "No, Clara! You can!" Ruth shouted, a fire igniting in her eyes. "You have to believe. Remember the stories our mother told us? The strength of the women before us? This is yours. It's your time." The resolve in Ruth's voice was a lifeline, but the shadows still loomed large, inching closer, clawing at Clara's resolve. "I remember," Clara's voice faded, trailing off as a wave of pain crashed into her again. This time, it was different. There was weight behind it, a heaviness that felt like destiny, a pull toward something almost cosmic. Ruth was right, the stories of their lineage surged through her, a chorus of strength and resilience. She could almost feel them, a constellation of women surrounding her, their voices blending into a symphony of encouragement. "Push, Clara! Push!" Ruth's voice cut through the storm, a beacon in the dark. Clara focused on the sound, on the warmth of her sister's presence, the promise of life waiting just beyond the veil of pain. One breath, then another, each one a step closer to salvation, the abyss threatening to swallow her whole. In that moment, the walls began to shift, the shadows losing their grip. There was a flicker of light, a spark igniting deep within her. She was not alone. The fear was still there, but so was the strength, a fire that had been waiting to erupt. Clara closed her eyes and surrendered to the moment, her body a vessel, a bridge between worlds. I remember, she whispered again, this time with conviction. I remember love. And with that, she pushed, the sound echoing like a battle cry against the encroaching darkness. The air shifted, heavy with the promise of new life, a collision of worlds, fear and hope, despair and joy melding into something beautiful, something impossible, right there in the heart of the storm. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and smoke. A fire crackled, shadows dancing on the walls of the small hut, the walls adorned with faded symbols, whispers of a past that felt more like a fevered dream than history. Inside, the tension was palpable, a raw, throbbing pulse that echoed the heartbeats of those gathered. I stood there, knees trembling, watching as my mother, eyes wild, gripped the talisman tightly, a cracked piece of wood shaped like a crescent moon. Her hands trembled, but it wasn't fear, it was the weight of generations pressing against her chest. Don't you understand, she hissed, her voice both fierce and fragile. This is our way. The ancestors demand tribute. Across from her, my brother, Julian, the skeptic, scoffed, his brow furrowed in disbelief. Tribute? Mom, they're not going to come for us. The only ghosts here are the ones in your head. His voice rose, cutting through the smoky haze, a jagged edge against the smooth flow of tradition. And yet, uncertainty twisted in my gut. I could feel the echoes of my ancestors humming through the air, ancient rhythms that sang of belief and ritual, whispers that made my skin prickle. I remember the stories, my grandmother's voice, soft yet commanding, telling tales of the spirits that roamed the night, guardians of our souls. But Julian, oh, Julian, with his analytical mind and relentless pursuit of logic, he was at war with the very essence of our being. He represented the empirical, the cold, hard facts of a world that dismissed what could not be seen or measured. How could he not see? How could he not feel that we were tethered to something greater, something beyond the veil of the living? Mama, I urged softly, trying to bridge the chasm that had formed between us. My eyes darted nervously between them. Maybe we should listen, just this once. What if, my voice faltered, thick with the weight of my own doubt. What if we ignored the warnings? What if nothing happened, but we were left to grapple with the lingering fear of what could have been? Julian's laughter echoed like a gunshot in the stillness. What if? What if it just rains tomorrow? That's no reason to dance in the mud. His words sliced through the room, igniting an old rage within my mother. The air crackled again, a shiver crawling down my spine as the fire flickered ominously, as if the flames themselves were reacting to the clash of ideologies. You see, I stood in the middle, torn between the shadowy realms of traditional belief and the glaring light of empirical knowledge. I felt the weight of both worlds thumping against my heart, a relentless drumbeat that threatened to drown me. In that small hut, the world outside faded into an abstract blur. I could hear the cicadas singing their nightly chorus, the wind whispering secrets through the trees, yet I was trapped in this moment, this fight, this impossible choice. What if you're wrong? My mother's voice trembled, a fierce flame flickering against Julian's cold logic. What if the spirits are real, and we ignore them? Julian's face contorted, disbelief morphing into frustration. What if they're not? What if we just dance around your meaningless trinkets while the world moves on without us? The challenge hung between them, thick as the fog that rolled through the valley. It felt as though time had seeped into the room, turning seconds into centuries. Every breath was a battle, every heartbeat a testament to the weight of familial duty versus the pull of rational inquiry. Suddenly, the fire crackled louder, and the shadows twisted unnaturally, morphing into shapes that seemed to mock us. I remember the sensation of ice creeping into my bones, a shiver that curled my toes, igniting primal fears. Mama, please, I whispered, feeling the tears pooling at the corners of my eyes. What if we're being watched? What if we're not alone? The room fell silent, the air thickening with my words. My mother's fierce demeanor faltered, her grip on the talisman softening. For a moment, I could see the flicker of doubt reflected in her eyes, and it terrified me. Because I wanted her to believe in the old ways, the ancestral customs that had been passed down like family heirlooms, whispered into the ears of children around flickering flames. But Julian was an anchor, pulling me towards the surface of reason, though beneath, I felt the currents of tradition swirling, threatening to pull me under. "They're just stories," he argued, his voice lowering, as if afraid to disturb the spirits. "Stories made to comfort those who can't face reality." Reality! The word hung in the air like a spectre. It felt like a betrayal of everything we had known. I swallowed hard, the taste of fear acidic on my tongue, each pulse of my heart a reminder of the daunting choice before me. "Maybe it's both," I finally whispered, and the suggestion felt like a sin. "Maybe there's a balance. What if we honor the past and still embrace the future?" I could feel the weight of their gazes, the cracks in my heart widening. They were two sides of a coin, and here I was, stuck on the edge, teetering dangerously. The fire blazed, illuminating the imperfections in our skin, the scars of our history. "I remember," I said softly, words spilling out like a confession. "I remember the stories. The way they made me feel alive, connected to something beyond myself." The silence enveloped us again, thick and heavy. Outside, the winds howled, a tempest brewing as if nature mirrored our turmoil. The cicadas fell silent, as if waiting, holding their breath in anticipation. In that moment, the world felt impossibly vast, full of ungraspable mysteries, the cosmos stretching infinitely above us. I could sense a shift, an electric thrill that prickled at my skin. The spirits, ancestors, or whatever else roamed in that night, they were watching, waiting. The confrontation was inevitable, and I was at the center of it, teetering on the brink of chaos, ready to be swept away, carried by the currents of belief and reason, forever intertwined. The fire flickered, shadows leapt, and the clock in my heart ticked louder, echoing the pulse of something that transcended us all. The night was far from over, the line between tradition and knowledge blurred, a haunting melody that pulled at the corners of my soul, beckoning me into the depths of the unknown. And I could feel the weight of it, the urgency of our choices, the ache of a destiny that awaited just beyond the veil. The room was heavy with silence, a suffocating weight that pressed against the walls, pushing out all light, all hope. It was there, an expanse of muted colors and sterile scents, where the rhythmic beep of a monitor punctuated the stillness with a cold, detached urgency. I remember the moment when the doctor's voice broke through that silence, a dissonant chord in a symphony of despair. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, eyes darkened with the burden of her words, like clouds ready to unleash rain. The world tilted on its axis, and I found myself teetering on the brink of an abyss that felt both foreign and intimately familiar. Across the room, MIA sat crumpled in the corner, her body curled inward as if trying to protect what remained of her shattered dreams. I could see the tears spilling over, hot and glistening like tiny stars extinguished too soon. She was my sister, my heart, and in that moment, I wanted to reach out and pull her pain into my own skin, to absorb it like a sponge and rid her of this unbearable weight. But I was frozen, a spectator in her tragedy, unable to bridge the chasm that had opened between us. I remember the way the clock ticked, each second stretching into eternity, mocking us with its relentless march forward. "You should have been here," she murmured, voice cracking like dry earth beneath a relentless sun. "You should have been here for me. For us." The accusation hung thick in the air, sharp enough to draw blood. The truth was, I hadn't been there. I was lost in my own world, too wrapped up in my own fears and insecurities to recognize the tempest brewing in hers. And then there was Sam, her partner, standing at the edge of the room like a ghost, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, shoulders slumped in resignation. I could feel his grief radiating like heat from a flame, overwhelming, consuming. His pain was a mirror, reflecting every inch of our collective loss, yet it felt like another world altogether, a grief too raw, too jagged to touch. I watched as he turned towards MIA, his eyes brimming with unshed tears, a storm brewing just beneath the surface. "We'll get through this," he said, but the words hung in the air, a hollow promise that reverberated with uncertainty. In that moment, I felt the walls closing in, the air growing thick with unspoken fears and dreams left to wither in the dark. The thought of what could have been gnawed at my insides, an insistent ache that wouldn't let go. I remember the image of tiny fingers, miniature toes, a soft coo that would fill the void with boundless joy. It felt like a knife twisting in my heart, a reminder of the life that had been cruelly snatched away. MIA looked up at Sam, eyes glistening with a desperate hope that cracked under the weight of reality. "I wanted to be a mother," she said, voice barely above a whisper, each word dripping with the weight of 1,000 unfulfilled wishes. The vulnerability in her gaze shattered something deep within me. I wanted to scream, to rage against the universe for this unthinkable loss, but all I could do was stand there, a silent witness to a tragedy that felt so deeply personal, yet so achingly universal. The moments blurred together, a cacophony of emotions crashing against the shores of our hearts. I caught glimpses of Mia's hand, shaking as it reached for the empty cradle that had once held so much promise. It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck, the inevitable horror played out before my eyes in excruciating detail. We were all there, trapped in the gravitational pull of grief, each of us wrestling with our own demons, our own shadows dancing just beyond the fringes of the light. "Why did this happen?" she choked out, the words barely surfacing, like a diver gasping for air after too long underwater. I wished I had an answer, some balm to soothe the gaping wound that had opened wide between us. But all I could offer was my presence, a silent beacon in the storm of her despair. The minutes felt like hours, each heartbeat echoing the void left by our lost child. I wanted to reach out, to pull Mia into my embrace and shield her from the world, to promise that everything would be all right. But I felt so small, so powerless against the enormity of her pain. It was as if I was standing on the edge of a vast ocean, the waves crashing against the shore, each one a reminder of what could have been. And then, in the depths of that silence, a shift occurred. Sam stepped forward, his voice trembling with raw intensity. "We can't let this define us, Mia. We can't lose ourselves in this pain." The passion in his voice hung in the air, charged with an electric energy that crackled between us. It was a desperate plea, a lifeline thrown into turbulent waters, and for a moment, I felt the flicker of hope. But it was fleeting, so easily extinguished by the reality of our circumstances. I remember the way Mia's shoulders fell, her resolve crumbling like dry leaves underfoot. "What if I can't move on?" Her words were a whisper, a haunting refrain that echoed into the silence, and I realized then that this battle was so much larger than any of us. It was a fight against the very essence of loss, a journey through the shadows that threatened to engulf us all. As the moments dragged on, I felt the heaviness settle into my bones, a cacophony of grief weaving through the fabric of our being. We were caught in a cycle of despair, yearning for answers, for solace, yet finding none. In that sterile room, surrounded by the remnants of dreams shattered, I understood the depth of our collective struggle. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, wrapping around us like a cocoon, isolating us from the world beyond those sterile walls. I remember the sounds, the beeping of machines, the soft rustle of sheets, the muffled sobs that slipped from our lips. Each sound was a reminder that life continued outside, even as we crumbled within. And in that crushing silence, I realized that grief isn't linear. It's a winding road filled with sharp turns and unexpected detours, a journey each of us must navigate in our own way. The thought lingered, this emotional toll we carried, this weight of loss that would forever shape us, echoing through our lives like a whisper from the beyond. It was a cycle, a loop that never truly ended, and as we stood on the precipice of our collective grief, I felt the shadows closing in, pressing against my chest, squeezing my heart tight. Each breath was a reminder, each heartbeat a testament to the love we had lost, the dreams we had dreamed, now forever etched in the fabric of our souls. And in that moment, as the world outside continued its relentless march forward, I knew that somehow, we would find a way to carry our pain. We would wield it like a sword, a testament to the strength of our love, even in the face of unimaginable loss. The emotional toll of our experience would forge a bond that could never be severed, a reminder of what it means to love fiercely, even when faced with the darkest of nights. The wail of a newborn pierces the air, sharp as shattered glass. In the dim light of the room, shadows dance across the walls like restless spirits, each heartbeat echoing with a thrum of life and desperation. I remember the moment clearly, the smell of sweat mingling with the metallic tang of fear, as Sarah clutched the edge of the bed, her knuckles white and strained. "It's too much," she gasped, eyes wild, reflecting a torment only the unbearable weight of labor could conjure. The clock on the wall ticked, each second stretching into eternity, a cruel reminder that time waits for no one, especially not for those caught in the throes of life and death. And then there was me, Anna, a midwife wrestling with my own demons even as I fought to guide Sarah through this storm. What could I give her? My hands trembled, not from fear but from the knowledge that every decision I made could tip the balance between life and the abyss. You can do this, I whispered, each word a fragile promise, but inside, I felt like a child trying to hold back the tide. The weight of my own failures pressed down on me, a thick fog that threatened to suffocate. Just breathe. One more push. But Sarah's breaths were ragged, consumed by the pain that felt like it would consume us both. I saw the flicker of doubt cross her face, a shadow creeping in. What if she failed? What if I failed? I had seen it before, the way hope can falter in a moment of crisis, how dreams can dissolve like mist before the dawn. Outside, the world carried on, oblivious to the battle within these four walls. Is it time? A voice pierced through my thoughts. Maya, my assistant, her young face etched with determination, yet eyes betraying her own fear. I nodded, knowing that she was still learning, still grappling with the weight of responsibility that came with this sacred calling. Trust your instincts, I urged her, but remember, we're in this together. As the minutes bled into one another, a cacophony of screams and cries filled the space, the rawness of it all churning in my stomach. I felt the familiar rush of memories, my first delivery, the way the air had felt electric, the thrill of watching life unfold. But that thrill had its shadows, moments of failure that haunted me like a relentless spectre. I remember lying awake at night, haunted by the faces of mothers who had trusted me with their lives, only for circumstances to conspire against us in the darkest hours. Please, Sarah's voice cut through, desperate and laced with anguish, pulling me back. I can't do this. Her fear echoed like a drumbeat, and I saw flashes of my own struggles mirrored in her eyes. It was as if time stood still, an electric charge in the air, the kind that comes before a storm. You're stronger than you know, I told her, even as my heart raced. Every word felt like a lifeline thrown into turbulent waters. Another push. The room was a tempest, filled with the sound of labor and the scent of blood and sweat. I could see the flicker of life just beyond the horizon of pain, the moon on the edge of darkness. Together, Sarah! I cried, and in that moment, the world outside faded, time a mere whisper. I could feel the weight of every midwife who had come before me, the echoes of their struggles, their victories, and their heartbreaks woven into this moment. But then it happened, an ominous shift, a chill that wrapped around us, squeezing the air from my lungs. I met Maya's gaze, and I saw the fear. Something's wrong, she whispered, her voice trembling. My heart sank, I had felt it too. The rhythm of life was faltering, and with it, all our hopes. Sarah, listen to me, I said, grabbing her hand, the heat of her skin grounding me. You need to push. Now. The gravity of our situation loomed, a dark cloud threatening to break, but I wouldn't let it. I wouldn't let her slip away into the shadows. Stay with me, I urged, my voice breaking over the swell of uncertainty. The room became a flurry of movement, a dance of urgency. I felt the presence of my own ghosts, the faces of mothers I had failed, each one a reminder of the stakes. Tears stung my eyes. Was I enough? Would I fail again? I looked to Maya, and her determination bolstered me. We were more than midwives, we were warriors in this battle for life. With a final, agonizing push, a cry shattered the tension, raw and primal, a new life, born from chaos. Relief washed over me, but it was fleeting, a thin veil covering the weight of what we all had just endured. Sarah collapsed back against the pillows, gasping for breath, her eyes wide with disbelief. I held the tiny, wriggling form to my chest, heart pounding, feeling the weight of the world lift just slightly. Hope flickered, a fragile flame in a darkened room. But as they placed that life into Sarah's arms, I couldn't shake the feeling that this victory was tinged with something darker, deeper. The struggle was never over, it was a cycle, a continuum of pain and joy, a haunting melody that echoed through the corridors of time. I could feel the ghosts of midwives past whispering through the air, their stories etched in the very fabric of our existence. The clock on the wall ticked on, each second a reminder that life is a series of moments, the beautiful and the devastating, intertwined in an eternal dance. I looked down at the mother and child, their bond a testament to resilience. But as I stood there, the weight of everything, I remembered the struggles ahead, the battles yet to come. The joy of one life blooming while others faded into the shadows. And just as I began to breathe again, the air thickened with the knowledge that in this world of midwives, every joy was carved from the depths of struggle, and every life brought forth was a flicker of hope in the face of darkness. As I turned back toward the shadows, I felt the pull of the next moment waiting, the next life yearning to break free. The cycle never truly ends, it simply waits, whispering promises and fears alike, a haunting lullaby for those who dare to listen. The wind howled like a restless spirit, sharp and biting, as I stood outside the crumbling stone cottage where the shadows twisted and danced with malicious glee. Inside, the air was thick with sweat and the scent of blood, life teetering on the edge of oblivion. I could hear it, the wails of a woman, raw and primal, clawing at the walls of her sanctuary, where the echoes of both hope and despair collided like thunder. There was no time for niceties, death lurked just outside the door, eager to snatch away what little light flickered within. Marguerite, the noble midwife, stood tall, her silk gown stained with the remnants of childbirth. Her gloved hands, elegant yet trembling, betrayed her confidence. She had saved lives in her gilded chambers, where silver spoons gleamed, and the air was perfumed with roses. Yet here, in this squalid dwelling, the threads of her world began to unravel. "Push," she commanded, but the word hung heavily in the air, steeped in urgency and fear. The woman, Elodie, writhed beneath the weight of her labor, eyes wide and frantic, searching for an anchor in the tumult of pain. "I can't," Elodie gasped, her voice a mere whisper beneath the storm of her agony. "I can't do this." In that moment, her vulnerability bared the truth that privilege could not shield Marguerite from. Elodie's eyes, pools of desperation, locked onto Marguerite's, and it felt like a fracture in the very fabric of their existence. They were bound, yet separated by invisible chains of class, one a noble lady, the other a peasant woman, both gripping onto their fates with trembling hands. Marguerite's heart raced, pounding against her ribcage like a caged bird desperate for freedom. She had trained in the finest academies, attended lavish balls, but here, amidst the dirt and the shadows, she felt the suffocating weight of her status. What did it matter? Titles and riches stripped bare in the face of mortality. The spectre of class loomed large, casting a pall over the room, mocking their shared struggle. "You're stronger than this," she urged, though her own conviction wavered. Elodie's response was a choked sob, a sound that pierced through the chaos, a reminder of the myriad ways life could twist and turn. The weight of the world rested on her shoulders, where all that existed was survival, no ribbons, no finery, just the raw, unyielding truth of existence. As another contraction ripped through her, she clawed at the dirt-stained straw beneath her, as if grasping for the earth itself to pull her back from the brink. Outside, the wind shrieked, a ghostly lament for lives lost and lives yet to come. I could almost see the shadows writhe in the corners, hungry for the scent of blood. I could feel the past clawing at my throat, reminding me of the ages of women who had stood in this very spot, midwives and mothers, warriors of a different kind, fighting with all they had against the grinding gears of fate. The clock in the corner ticked ominously, each second a reminder that time, in its relentless march, offered no mercy. "Help me!" Elodie cried, her voice rising, echoing against the stone walls. It was a plea that mingled with the wind, and in that moment, Marguerite felt the choking knot of fear twist tighter. She had saved the lives of noble children, held them in her arms, wrapped them in silk blankets. But here, in this stifling home where dirt and despair collided, she had no idea if she possessed the strength to save Elodie. A spectre of doubt loomed ominously, whispering that perhaps she was nothing more than a well-dressed fraud, playing at a game too grand for her fragile heart. Then, just as the final contraction ripped like thunder through Elodie's body, there was a sudden silence, a stillness that hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Marguerite's heart raced, a drumbeat of horror. Time froze, and all that existed was the heartbeat of the moment, pulsing like a living thing, fragile and fierce. This was it. The moment of reckoning. The clash of worlds, noble and peasant, privilege and suffering, colliding in a cacophony of fear and hope. "Stay with me, Elodie," Marguerite said, her voice barely above a whisper, trembling as she knelt beside the laboring woman. She gripped Elodie's hand, feeling the warmth of life coursing through it, mixed with the cold sweat of despair. You are not alone. And in that moment, something shifted. Elodie's gaze, once filled with terror, began to light with a spark of determination. The strength of 1,000 generations swirled within her, the echoes of women who had fought, who had bled, who had given their all for the sake of life. I can, she whispered, her voice gaining volume as she drew from the depths of her despair. I can do this. With every breath, the walls around them seemed to tremble, as if the very air could feel the weight of their shared struggle. Marguerite felt a surge of warmth, a pulse of unity, blurring the lines drawn by class and privilege. The wind outside howled, but inside, a fragile bond had formed, raw and vital, a connection born from the crucible of pain and hope. Breathe with me, Marguerite said, and they inhaled together, a shared rhythm that transcended the divides of their worlds, intertwined in the dance of life and death. As Elodie pushed again, the echoes of their breaths filled the air, and the storm outside seemed to relent, quieting in deference to the fierce struggle unfolding within those walls. Hope and fear coiled together, an electric tension that pulsed through the room, each heartbeat a step closer to the climax of life. The walls could not contain the tempest that brewed, a battle between class and circumstance, a raw, primal fight against the inevitable. Time had lost its meaning. In that moment, they were simply two women, struggling against the weight of their existence, bound by the same fate. And as the wind howled its ghostly lament, I could feel the weight of their story pressing against my very soul, a truth that felt both overwhelming and beautiful, a reminder that in the end, all that truly mattered was the love that emerged from the ashes of fear. The air was thick with unspoken words, a suffocating silence enveloping the room, drowning in the weight of despair. The clock ticked too loud, each second a reminder of what was lost, what could never be reclaimed. I stood there, heart racing, as Sarah's thin frame trembled in the corner, eyes wide and unfocused, lost in a world where shadows whispered secrets of betrayal. The flickering candlelight cast erratic shapes on the walls, shapes that danced and twisted like our thoughts, echoing our fears. I remember the way her fingers clawed at her hair, pulling at the roots as if trying to rip free from the horror that bound her. "Help me," she gasped, the words a fragile wisp of sound, hanging in the air like a ghost. I felt the chill crawling up my spine, a reminder that isolation had carved deep fissures in our souls, and the community we once held dear had become a distant memory, like faded photographs tucked away in an old box, yellowing and forgotten. Across the room stood Chris, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, an island of tension in the storm of emotion swirling around us. He was always the protector, the one with the bright smile and booming laughter that could draw us all in. But today, that smile was a mask, cracked and barely holding together, a reminder of how fragile we all were. I could see the struggle in his eyes, a tempest of doubt and regret battling against the tides of hope. "How did we let it come to this?" he whispered, the words barely escaping his lips, heavy with the weight of blame. It was a question that hung in the air, a noose tightening around our throats, squeezing out any breath of confidence we had left. I could feel the memories clawing their way back into my mind, the nights spent laughing under the stars, sharing dreams that felt as vast as the cosmos, the promises of support that now felt like cruel taunts. "Remember when we thought we could save the world?" I said, trying to lighten the mood, but the laugh that escaped was hollow, echoing back at me with a mocking tone. Chris's gaze dropped, and I felt the cracks in our friendship widen, the isolation seeping in, wrapping around us like a serpent ready to strike. "We were stupid," he said, bitterness lacing his words. "We thought we could make a difference." I remember standing in the middle of the street, hands raised high, shouting for change, for connection, for hope. The people had gathered, voices rising in a chorus that promised unity. But now, the streets lay empty, a testament to our failures, to the walls we built around ourselves, brick by brick, fueled by fear and miscommunication. Sarah shifted, her eyes darting to the shadows as if they held answers, hidden truths that we were too blind to see. "I'm scared." Her voice trembled, each syllable a fragile thread, weaving a tapestry of vulnerability that cut through the tension. "Scared of what?" Chris asked, voice hardening, a wall slamming down between us. "Scared of being alone?" "Because we're all alone now." The truth hit hard, searing through the silence like a bolt of lightning, illuminating the raw, gaping wounds we tried to hide. I could see Sarah flinch, her body curling in on itself, a protective cocoon against the harsh reality. She had lost so much: friends, family, the very essence of what it meant to belong. Those echoes of laughter had turned into whispers of abandonment, a chilling reminder that the community we sought was crumbling around us. "I remember when we thought we were invincible," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, the weight of nostalgia pressing down like the thick fog outside. We laughed in the face of fear. We held hands and jumped into the unknown. But now, the unknown loomed large, an insurmountable mountain that stood between us and the solace we craved. The past felt like a cruel joke, laughter fading into the echoes of our isolation. I could see it in Chris's eyes, a flicker of anger, of betrayal. They were supposed to be our support network, our safety net, but instead, they had become ghosts, haunting the corners of our hearts. "Stop it," he said, voice rising, the fear morphing into something darker. "Stop romanticizing what we had. It was never real." "Then what are we?" I shot back, desperate for him to see the truth, to understand that isolation was the enemy. "What are we without each other?" The moment hung between us, fragile as glass, ready to shatter. In that silence, I felt the weight of 1,000 memories crashing down, each one a whisper of connection slipping further away. The community we had built felt like a castle of sand, each grain falling through our fingers, washing away with the tide of despair. I wanted to scream, to claw at the walls that surrounded us, to break free from the isolation that threatened to consume us whole. Sarah stepped forward, her body trembling, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We need each other," she said, her voice now steady, a beacon cutting through the darkness. "If we don't fight for this, we'll lose everything." I watched as Chris's facade cracked, the anger melting into something softer, something almost vulnerable. The shadows that had danced around us pulled back, revealing the pain that lay bare within our hearts. Each heartbeat echoed the truth: we were stronger together, but the isolation had torn us apart, leaving us to grapple with the remnants of what once was. But could we bridge the chasm that had grown between us? Or were we doomed to remain trapped in our own darkness, haunted by the ghosts of our past? I remember the way Sarah's hand reached for mine, trembling yet resolute, a lifeline in the storm. I could see Chris wavering, the hesitation in his eyes as he fought against the tide of isolation, the whispers of doubt still lingering but slowly fading. The air crackled with tension, a charged atmosphere that promised confrontation, a reckoning that had been years in the making. In that moment, I felt the weight of the world pressing down on us, a reminder that the ghosts of our past would continue to linger, until we finally chose to confront them. And so, we stood there, teetering on the edge of something unnameable, the fragile threads of connection weaving their way back into the fabric of our lives, daring us to believe that even in the deepest isolation, community could rise anew. But would we have the courage to embrace it, to shed the layers of fear that bound us? The clock ticked on, each second a heartbeat in the stillness, as we waited for the answer, suspended in the delicate balance of hope and despair, forever caught in the swirling vortex of our emotions. The room was thick with the smell of sweat and fear, a raw concoction that clung to the walls like the ghosts of women who had come before. I stood there, heart racing, pulse echoing in my ears. The midwife's hand shook, not from age, but from the weight of centuries pressing down like a funeral shroud, threatening to stifle the breath of the living. The walls, adorned with crude pictures of birthing positions and grim reminders of loss, felt like they were closing in, suffocating. "Push!" A voice rang out, sharp as a blade. It was Margaret, a midwife with eyes that spoke of both wisdom and weariness. She was caught between tradition and the fear of what lay ahead. This was her third birth this night, and her strength was waning. The woman on the bed thrashed, a wild creature caught in a storm, and I felt every heartbeat as if it were my own. "I can't," the mother gasped, tears streaming down her face, pooling in the creases of her neck. "I can't do this." The words were a desperate prayer, echoing through the ages, calling back to the women who had screamed through the pain of labor alone, without a comforting hand in sight, without the knowledge that someone, anyone, would be there to catch their child. I remember the stories my grandmother told, a time before we had sterile rooms and medications, a time when the very notion of a midwife was both revered and reviled. They were the wise women, the healers, the whispered legends of their villages. Yet, they were also the ones accused of witchcraft, branded by their very role in life and death. The irony was not lost on me. To bring life into the world was often a death sentence. "Breathe with me," Margaret urged, her voice a soothing balm over the chaos. "In and out. Feel the pain, embrace it." She was a warrior, battling not just the physical act of birthing but the very notion of what it meant to be a midwife through centuries of change. The air crackled with tension, her faith hanging by a thread, her scars hidden beneath layers of determination and doubt. I felt the shuddering of time beneath us, the echoes of generations whispering secrets into the air. The room was a time capsule, resonating with the cries of women who had fought against the tide of mortality. I glanced at the mother again, her gaze wild, locked onto Margaret with a mixture of fear and hope. It was a connection that transcended time, a raw, primal bond that pulsed through the air like a heartbeat, echoing the very heart of midwifery. "Keep going. You are not alone." Margaret's voice rose, a rallying cry. I could see the sweat beading on her brow as she wiped her hands on her apron, stained with the remnants of life and loss. Her own children were grown, but in this moment, every cry, every push, every moment of doubt she faced was a resurrected ghost, a phantom of her past. Then came the scream, unearthly and primal, a sound that pulled at the very fabric of the universe. The mother arched her back, her body an instrument of life and death. The air thickened, electrified, as if the cosmos itself held its breath. I could almost hear the echoes of the midwives from centuries past, their laughter, their cries, their songs of resilience, filling the corners of the room with the weight of their legacy. "Just one more time." Margaret's voice cracked, desperation coloring her tone. It was a plea, a prayer, a command, the culmination of every battle fought in silence and shadows. The mother gasped, and in that moment, I saw not just a woman, but an entire lineage of mothers, women who had defied the odds, who had fought against the tides of mortality with all their might. I remembered the stories of the plague, of women working in the darkest nights, guiding souls into the world, only to watch them fade into the abyss. As the baby's head crowned, the fear that gripped the room turned into something palpable, something almost sacred. Every breath, every heartbeat was a reminder that innovations in midwifery had come at a cost: the birth of hospitals, the rise of obstetrics, the shift from community to sterile environments, where the warmth of a hand was often replaced with cold instruments and clinical efficiency. But in this moment, in this room, we were untouched by the outside world. We were alchemists of life, conjuring magic from pain, transforming suffering into joy. And then, with a final cry that shattered the silence, the baby emerged, a miracle wrapped in blood and cries, a new soul cast into the world. The mother collapsed back, exhausted yet elated, and Margaret, trembling yet triumphant, cradled the child in her arms, the weight of history heavy on her shoulders. It was a moment suspended in time, a collision of past and present, where every innovation, every change in midwifery knotted together in a tapestry of resilience and rebirth. But even in that joy, I felt the lingering shadows of doubt, of fear. What would the future hold for this child? What legacy would they carry? Would they know the warmth of a midwife's hands, or would they be lost in the sterile embrace of hospitals, where life was reduced to charts and numbers? Time felt cyclical, as if the past, present, and future were all woven together in an unending dance of birth, struggle, and survival. As I stood there, breathless and wide-eyed, I realized that midwifery was not just a profession, it was a heartbeat, a lifeline, a testament to the power of women who had fought and bled for every ounce of knowledge passed down through generations. Each birth was a revolution, a cry against the injustice of mortality, a reminder that life, in all its fragility, was worth fighting for. The room rang with the cries of a newborn, mingling with the echoes of the past, weaving a story that would never truly end. I had witnessed a moment of transformation, a birth of hope, and as the tears of joy flowed, I felt the heavy weight of history bearing down, a reminder that with every innovation came the spectre of change, the ghost of what once was. And in that moment, standing in the sacred space between life and death, I knew this was just the beginning. The air was thick with the scent of blood and sweat, a heady mix that hung in the dim light like a ghostly shroud. The cries of a newborn pierced the silence, sharp and raw, echoing against the stone walls like a battle cry from the underbelly of a world that hardly recognized its own power. I stood there, heart racing, hands trembling, as I caught my breath. The world outside was still, a painted facade of normalcy, while inside this small, candlelit chamber, life and death waged war. I remember the feel of the rough wooden floor beneath my feet, grounding me even as chaos swirled. I remember Myra, a trembling figure beside me, her chestnut hair falling like curtains around her face, hiding her terror, her fierce determination. She was a midwife, my mentor, but in that moment, she was a warrior, standing ready to face the fury of a patriarchy that had long tried to silence our kind. Hold her tight, she whispered, and I felt the weight of those words. To hold a life, to cradle it against the storm of a world that deemed us lesser. The mother's screams echoed in the corners, a symphony of pain and strength. I could see her eyes, wild and wide, reflecting the flickering flame of the oil lamp. The shadows danced, mocking us, weaving between the edges of hope and despair. This is not the end. I wanted to shout, but the words caught in my throat, thick as the bile of fear. I knew the world beyond this room, the one that waited like a predator, poised to take everything from us. But Myra, she was unyielding. I watched as she smoothed the mother's brow, murmuring incantations that felt like magic. It wasn't just the words, it was the belief behind them, a fierce rebellion against a system that told women we were vessels, not creators. You are strong, she said, wiping sweat from the mother's face, her voice a steady heartbeat in the frenzy. I remember the tightening in my chest as I thought of my sister, Lila, back in the village. She had always been the brighter flame, the one who could sway the hearts of men with just a smile. But that smile had dimmed under the weight of expectation. Women must know their place, the elders had said, their voices like chains clanking in a darkened room. Those words haunted me, whispering insects buzzing in the back of my mind. Myra, I gasped, what if something goes wrong? My voice felt small, evaporating like steam in the cold air of reality. But she just smiled, a smile that cracked the surface of my fear. We are the midwives of fate. We stitch lives together, even when the world wants to tear them apart. With each scream, each cry, I felt the pull of something deep within me, a recognition that this was more than just a birth, it was a rebellion against a world that would suffocate us in silence. I felt a bond tightening between the three of us, a visceral connection that transcended the oppressive weight of our society. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second a reminder of the life and death race we were in. Time was a cruel mistress, and the shadows whispered secrets of what lay lurking beneath the surface. They spoke of women who had lost everything, the ghosts of the past clawing at the edges of my consciousness. I thought of the stories I had heard, the tales of midwives branded as witches, their voices silenced before they could speak the truth of their power. The baby came, slippery and screaming, a fragile thing wrapped in blood and hope. Myra's hands were steady, guiding the new life toward its mother, and in that moment, everything shifted. The world outside faded, and I was left with the raw intensity of what it meant to bring forth life in the face of death. I could feel the warmth radiating from that tiny body, a spark in the darkness, a promise that we might yet find our place in a world that sought to crush us. Welcome, Myra breathed, and as she placed the infant in the mother's trembling arms, I saw something shift in the woman's eyes, a flicker of defiance. It was a small flame, but it was there, igniting a rebellion that had long lain dormant. You are a mother now, I whispered, and the weight of that role settled upon her like a crown, heavy with expectation yet light with possibility. But in the back of my mind, the shadows loomed larger. What would happen when morning came? When the sun rose high and illuminated the truth of our world? I felt the dread creeping back like a thief in the night, snatching away the moments of joy. I thought of Lila, tethered to a life she never chose, and the countless others lost to the tide of a patriarchal society that would never understand what we held within us. The clock struck the hour, a haunting chime that reverberated through the very bones of the earth. I glanced at Myra, her expression a mixture of triumph and sorrow. This is just the beginning, she said, her voice steady despite the echo of loss that loomed over us. I nodded, feeling the pulse of something rising within me, something fierce and unyielding. But there was no time for celebration. Outside, the world was waiting, a tempest of expectations and judgments poised to pounce. I could feel the air shift, charged with the energy of unspoken truths, and I knew this moment was a fragile bridge between what had been and what could be. As the mother cradled her child, I caught a glimpse of the future reflected in her gaze, an uncertain promise that shimmered like silver in the dark. I yearned to hold on to that glimmer, to fight for it with everything I had, even as the shadows closed in around us, whispering doubts, mocking our fragile victories. "Remember," Myra's voice broke through my thoughts, fierce and unwavering. "We are more than what they say. We are the keepers of life." In that instant, I felt the weight of generations resting upon my shoulders, an inheritance of strength and sorrow. And as the shadows loomed, I knew we would face them together, midwives of a new dawn, warriors battling a darkness that sought to claim us. I held my breath, waiting for the next heartbeat, the next cry, the next moment to shape our destiny in a world that dared to overlook our power. And as the air crackled with anticipation, I realized the story was only just beginning. The candle flickers, casting shadows that dance like restless spirits on the crumbling stone walls. I can hear her breathing, soft and ragged. Eloan, a midwife, her hands trembling as she clutches the wooden staff, worn smooth from years of use, the weight of generations resting upon her narrow shoulders. "Push," she commands, her voice a low rumble, authority wrapped in desperation. My heart races, mirroring the frantic rhythm of the laboring woman sprawled upon the straw-strewn floor, her cries piercing the air, raw and primal, echoing through the small, damp chamber. I remember the first time I saw a birth, an explosion of life amid the grim spectre of death. A child emerged, slippery and howling, yet in this moment, it felt like a funeral shrouded in a haze of sweat and blood. The air was thick, pregnant with tension, the spectre of failure looming like a heavy shroud. Would the child survive? Would the mother rise from this ordeal, light return to her eyes, or would she join the countless souls who had slipped away, leaving only memories etched in stone? Eloan's gaze is fierce yet haunted, as if she sees futures tangled in the strands of fate. Beside her, Marjorie, an apprentice, quakes with uncertainty, fingering the edge of her apron, a ritual of hope and fear. She's just a girl, really, yet thrust into this crucible, a witness to life and death, the unbreakable cycle of suffering. "I can't," Marjorie whispers, voice trembling. "What if—" Silence. Eloan snaps, her eyes blazing. "Life does not wait for your fears, child. You must harness the strength of the earth beneath your feet. This is your moment." The room vibrates with energy as if the very stones are alive, breathing in sync with the rhythm of the birthing. I feel my pulse quicken. It's absurd, really. What do I know of midwifery? But here I am, tangled in their fears, their hopes, feeling the weight of a world balanced on the edge of a knife. The laboring woman's screams peal through the air like thunder. "I can't do this," she wails, anguish transforming her features into something unrecognizable. In that moment, all of history whispers through her, echoes of countless mothers who have fought against the tides of mortality, clawing for survival. Eloan swallows hard, her face a canvas of determination woven with threads of despair. "You can. You must. Think of your child." The tension snaps like a taut string, and suddenly the room is electric, alive with the primal essence of creation. The air thickens, pregnant with possibility and dread. I remember the stories whispered around the hearth, tales of midwives who wielded power and vulnerability, claiming life against the shadows. Their fingers, covered in the dust of the earth, cradling the very essence of humanity. What sorcery is this? I can see it. I can see the head. Eloan shouts, her voice breaking through the thick veil of fear. The weight of her confidence floods the room, a lifeline thrown through turbulent waters. With each push, the laboring woman's face twists and contorts, agony and ecstasy intertwined in a macabre dance. I can feel the walls close in, the shadows creeping like dark tendrils around us, but amidst the horror, there's a flicker of hope, vibrant and stunning. Marjorie's hands shake as she reaches out, yearning to help yet gripped by her own demons. "What if I fail?" she whispers, her voice barely audible over the cacophony. "Then you learn," Eloan murmurs, her gaze fiercely locked on Marjorie's. "Life teaches through pain. You'll carry this moment, this weight, forever." The room holds its breath. Time warps as the woman cries out, a sound that reverberates through the very ground beneath us, a sound soaked in fear and anguish, yet laced with an unbreakable spirit. With one final push, the world tilts. The child, an apparition of hope, slides into Eloan's waiting hands, slick and wriggling, a miracle against the dark tapestry of existence. Silence envelops us like a haunting lullaby. The mother gasps, relief flooding her features, and for a heartbeat, the past and future collide, intertwining in a blinding flash of light. Yet, shadows linger. The air grows heavy, thick with memories of those lost, the weight of every mother who did not survive, every child who took their last breath before they ever saw the sun. The specters of doubt and fear whisper around us. Would this child live? Would Marjorie's hands learn their craft in time? Welcome to the world, Eloan breathes, cradling the squirming bundle, her voice laced with a fierce, protective love. May your life carry the echoes of those before you. Outside, the sun begins to set, casting long shadows over the cobblestones, the twilight wrapping the town in an eerie embrace. The world breathes like a living, pulsating thing, each heartbeat a testament to resilience. In that moment, I remember, every birth a rebellion against the inevitable, every cry a challenge to the dark, every life a legacy forged in the fires of struggle and hope. Marjorie watches Eloan, something shifting within her. The fear that had once anchored her now becomes a flicker of resolve igniting her spirit. I will learn, she vows, a promise that hangs in the thickening air. The weight of her words presses down on us, heavy yet liberating. Eloan nods, a silent acknowledgement of the torch being passed, the legacy of midwives unfurling like the petals of a flower, even in the face of decay. The shadows whisper, but now they bear witness to a new dawn, a truth woven into the fabric of existence. As Eloan rocks the child in her arms, I see it. The cycle continues, each scream of agony intertwined with laughter, each shadow a reminder of the light that follows. We stand amidst the echoes, the past alive in our bones, shaping the future in our hands. And as the night deepens, we are left cradling hope, fragile, unyielding hope, pulsating like a heartbeat in the darkness, a legacy that will shape the very fabric of our beliefs, long after the last candle has flickered out.